We have the absolute delight of having Sensei Lee Masters back with us. And I actually looked it up. The first time he was on with his father was episode 28. And I love that we can refer to these archives, that we have such a depth, because that's the point of this show, is creating an archive, a history, a living history. So go back and check out EP 28 if you haven't already. It's a delight. I can't remember which other EP you were back on, but I'm really excited when we get a returning guest because we just get to chat a little more and we get to get back to the roots of how this show is designed to be, which is kicking it at the coffee shop or in the car on the drive to the event. And it's a really beautiful thing. And before I introduce my co-host, I want to say to you watching, that means if you're here on the Zoom channel, we want your questions in real time. And Sensei Dauphin, who's running the gear tonight, he's going to make sure that lights up and you can see in the chat button where to ask your questions. And if you're with us on YouTube Live, get the fights going in the comments, drive that traffic, hit subscribe and like. And if you're listening to the podcast, drive safe and bake some sweet banana bread, whichever one you're doing. I'm here with Sensei Randy Dauphin, Sensei Nicolas Suino, Hanshi Gary Legacy. These men are responsible for all my martial arts. Hanshi Gary Legacy introduced me to martial arts in 1993, and I was hooked day one. And when I moved further away from him than made sense, he said, go train with Randy, who I call Sensei. And then through meeting Sensei Suino, I found my Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So I have nothing but gratitude, and I owe these men quite literally my life because my life wouldn't be what it is. It would be a shadow of it without what you've taught me and shown me. So that's my intro for you tonight. And then Sensei Dauphin. I'll throw it to you to give a little bit of an intro to Sensei Lee, and then we'll rip into our first topic.
Amazing. I need my glasses. As you mentioned, Sean, this is Sensei Master's third appearance on PKCC. The first time we had him on was with his dad, Paul Masters, who we were talking about before we started. I'm a respecter of education, and if you don't know, Sensei Masters is an osteopath. I have a lot of respect for that profession. My wife goes to an osteopath all the time. She instantly liked you more, Sensei Masters, because you were an osteopath. Um, if you don't know, Sensei Masters is a Mekio Kaden holder of, and I might butcher this, so I'm sorry, and feel free to correct me.
No
Um,
worries.
Tenjin Shinyu Ryu Jiu-Jitsu.
Yep.
And if you don't know what Makyokadens are, please go back to that episode and watch. It's another way of ranking people. We use a Dan Q system and they use a Mankyokadian system, and that's a much older system of ranking in Japan. Um, Interesting thing, he's also a Shudokan SMAA member in Sweden, and a student of, I'm gonna butcher this as well, Sensei, so please correct me if I do it wrong. Kubota Toshihiro Sensei, who is the current leader of his system. Is that correct, or did I mess that up? Oh,
He
your
he
dad is.
was he unfortunately he passed away.
Okay.
His son has taken over, but they're not very strong in Japan. So we are the leading force outside of Japan, really.
Amazing. So Sensei Paul Masters is one of the few non-Japanese who have ever received Makio Kaden in a classical Japanese martial art. And one other thing I want to say is, Sensei Masters has been more active on social media, which I really enjoy because I like to watch him training. And I would say he's a very classical martial artist who has embraced modern technology. And so when you see him on, you'll see him using everything from a heavy bag to a firearm. And that's one of the things, Sean, maybe we want to get into a little bit tonight is being a classical martial artist and moving yourself into the 21st century and maintaining your classical roots while using modern technologies. But listen, Sensei Masters, it's really awesome to have you back on for the third time. You're an elite group of people who've been on
Mhm.
here more than two times, and we're happy that you're in that elite group. Thank you so much for joining us. And it's what, 2:37 in the morning where he is. So we really
It is.
appreciate you joining in at that time zone.
And I've got some patience in about 8 hours time.
Not bad. Um, Not bad. You know what? I had a question queued up because one of the things we want to talk to you about is choking. But actually, you said something that just spurred a question. And I especially want to talk to you and Sensei Suino and Hanshi Legacy about this. Obviously, Sensei Dofang, your perspective will be welcome. But you said we're the leading force outside of Japan.
Mhm.
I think that's a common thing that happens, especially with the guests on our show, given that we tend to get very preeminent martial artists. But what's the importance of taking these things from Japan and dedicating one's life to being the leading force for it?
Um, well, I think the it's a big responsibility, obviously. The Koru schools are very they're not very strong at the moment in Japan, and in some ways also have a they could die out. And that's what's a worrying thing. And I think that as typically what I find with most things is that foreigners are normally more interested
Mm.
in what the nation is not interested in. So if you live by the beach, very rarely do you go to the beach. But if you live in the city, you go to the beach, and vice versa. And I think this is the case also with the Japanese martial arts, particularly the old Koru. You also have the fact that because, as you stated, the Menkyo Kaiden system in Tenjin Shinryu only has 5 levels, so you haven't got the appeal to go up the grades. And in fact, actually, in Kubota Sensei basically said when you get to Menkyo Kaiden, you go back and you start again. So it's, he always used to say Shugyo, Shugyo, Shugyo. Now, the modern translation of Shugyo is training, but that is also is to polish. It's the person that's polishing the jewel, and that's really what the Koru is about. Um, and as a family, we were taken on by Kubota Shihanki as because he could see that we would carry the jewel and continue with promoting Tenjin Shinryu in its best form. That hopefully in its best form anyway, the best that we can do.
I really love what you said about being near the beach and not going there. That happens to people. I used to live in LA, and the first 2 months there, everybody goes to the beach every day. And then you spend a year and you realize you haven't seen the water. Um, I want to ask you one more question and then go to Sensei Suino and then Hanshi Legacy. But I actually think it was back in episode 28. People watching, go check it. Not right now, though. Where I was first introduced to this word Koryu in its, just for people who haven't seen that app or haven't heard that concept, can you break down what that means in terms of being older and not as in favor?
Okay. So Koru, the basic cut-off point of a Koru system was in 1868, which was when the Meiji period kicked in. So this was after the Tokugawa period, which was ruled by the Tokugawa clan and by the shogun. Um, I actually, to sort of bring it round to the modern way of talking, I also like to call it ancient combatives, if you like. So they the whole idea is that jujitsu was used when the um, the samurai or the person didn't have their sidearms or their main weapon, so they dropped it and it was empty hand. And in fact, actually, in Shinno Shindaru, which is one of the parents of Tenjin Shinryu, it actually states that you're naked.
Hmm.
Not a good image this time of night in your place or morning in my place.
It all depends on the practitioner,
Yeah.
Lee.
It
That's
all
true.
depends if you're in north, south, or not.
Yeah.
And Randy, again, you need to put those glasses on if you think that's a good image for me.
You're a
Well,
fine figure of a man,
I
Sensei.
was thinking about my wife. I got to be honest with you.
Ah, okay, yeah, fair
Yeah.
enough. My wife doesn't do jiu-jitsu, unfortunately. So basically, Tenjin Shinryu is made up of two parent styles. Yoshinryu, Shinno Shindaru. Yoshinryu is deemed as one of the original styles of jiu-jitsu. Um, Dates back about 1500s. So you're talking the time when the introduction of kata was being used in the ruhas at that time. Um, I have here actually. I've got a Yoshinru scroll. Do you want me to get it out and show you a little bit?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought you'd say that. So this comes from I think it's about the 1700s. There you go. I won't
Wow.
I won't unravel it all because it's very long. So this is how the transmissions were handed over. All obviously always handwritten, and you had to get to certain levels to then receive certain scrolls. Um, and actually, some of these scrolls even differed to the practitioner that received it.
Mm.
So I compare it a lot. Before I did jujitsu, I did Goju karate, and I in England I went around the different systems, styles of Goju, sorry. And there's many different styles, and the reason being is because those styles, the individual teacher was taught slightly different to the others, and because of their stature and everything else. And I actually teach some of my students, depending on their age and everything else, um, a different way of doing the same principle.
Hmm.
So, so in the old Koru, the kata are always two man for jujitsu, and unless you're doing Iai Jatsu or Bato Jatsu. So, and again, they're just a principle. Then they're a way of dealing with a situation, if you like, but they're not the full box.
Hmm.
So when people look at these things, they might say, "Oh, that's not realistic," blah
Sure.
blah
Yep.
blah. And then I show them a way of doing it from a modern day standard. So what's particularly specific to Japanese martial arts is also the way that we sit in Seiza or Hirazu on our knees. There's no other arts that do that other than Japanese arts. And that's obviously because that's what they was doing every day.
So what I'm hearing you say a bit is that the very thing that makes it classical and lets it be passed down, which is these drills, these kata, can be the very thing that's alienating because people don't understand how complete they can be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they think they're antiquated as well. You know, there's many levels to each kata. To the principle it's teaching, to the striking method, the throwing method, whatever, strangulation method. But there's also there's a spiritual side to these things as well. So you get taught the the kuden, which is again it's an old way of teaching, which is from mouth to ear, and that's from teacher to student always. And depending that kuden can also be different depending on the person's level as well.
Thanks for that. Sensei Suino, so I want to go to you, and if you want to expand on any Koryu ideas, because I know you're very familiar. But the initial question as well is, being the leading force outside of Japan for anything, what's the importance of that? And why is it, as we've talked about the beach metaphor, why is it that people tend to be more fascinated than maybe they are today?
Yeah, well, I think one thing I can address there is yes, it's proximity, but the other thing I noticed is it's just like a lot of young people go through that phase where they want to be current, and they want to do the cool stuff, whatever that is. A lot of times
Sure.
it's more Western in Japan. When I was there, it was Western sports, it was baseball and things like that. And other than judo, which was and kendo, which were still considered pretty cool, most of the Koryu were considered stodgy, right? The young Japanese folks weren't that keen, at least when I lived there, on getting involved in a hierarchy like that and having to, slave away to learn the systems and to be in a stodgy environment where they had to adhere to a lot of what they called, considered older cultural norms. And so there's a barrier to it if you're young and energetic and you want to do, you want to just have fun. Now, having said that, there was some really interesting ways that people would deal with that. Now, Kyudo is archery is not the most uh, not the stodgiest of Koryu, but the dojo where I studied Kyudo was quite traditional. We had one of the best teachers in the country, and but it was big enough so that half the dojo was training with that guy, and the other half was the high school teams and the college teams that would come and practice. And we were given two arrows, and it was about 15 minutes to go through the whole ritual, the whole kata, right, to shoot those two arrows. And so as a result, we got really good at the kata. We did not get very good at shooting arrows.
Right.
Uh, uh, and over on the other side of the dojo, these damn college kids would walk in with an armload of arrows and just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. And they got really good at hitting the target, much quicker than we did. And the senseis were very dismissive of that. Oh, they're not learning the traditional ways. But what would happen is those kids, and this is kind of my modern philosophy of martial arts, is you open the door as wide as you can. Because some of those kids, after
Yeah.
5 years, after 10 years, they would go toward the classical side, and they had both sides of the skill set. One more funny story about that, and that is when when I had to go and test in Kyudo, we didn't test at our original dojo. We had to go to a bigger association place to test for rank in Kyudo. And when we went, there were people of all ages, but the high school and college kids, when they weren't, because you had to wait 3, 4, 5 hours sometimes to get your turn to shoot. Um, a lot of those kids brought boom boxes with them. So they're over in the courtyard practicing their hip hop while they're waiting for their turn to come shoot arrows in Kyudo and test. It blew me away. It was a very strange contrast. They were no less good at Kyudo than we were, but we were standing around very, very formally, and they were not.
They are way
Um,
better at breakdancing than you.
Yeah.
yes, they
They,
were.
they brought their cardboard and KOA.
That's always been true. Okay, so to your other point, I think these martial arts are very precious for a million reasons. Just like Sensei Masters was saying, uh, they teach on multiple levels, and that's why we're all in them after, right, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We're still in them because we embrace those lessons. Um, and because I think they're so valuable, somebody has to preserve them. And the Kuden or the Jikiden is wonderful. The scrolls are wonderful. Someone has to practice these arts, teach them, carry them out and demonstrate them, compete. Uh, and if the Japanese are, if their faces are turned away right now, then it falls to us to keep the tradition alive. And so be it.
Well, and one more question for you before I go to Hanshi Legacy on this topic. In your experience, Sensei Suino, is the concept of samurai as revered over there as it is by people over here? And the reason I ask is because when Sensei Masters talked about these arts from the 1500s, the 60s, where actual men were actually killing with these actual arts as samurai, that sounds so appealing. In what world can you pretend that's not exciting? But maybe in a world where the word samurai doesn't make people go, oh,
It means something a little bit different there because it's a social rank, right? Not just a guy that puts on armor and runs around with swords. It's a social rank. I would
Mm,
tell you, and we had Paul Martin on the show, and he mentioned this recently, right? That if the zombie apocalypse comes, the samurai families are going to remember who's samurai, right? Like they revere it, and they might not walk around in modern society with their suit and tie on and talk about it that much, but they've never forgotten that. Doesn't mean
right.
they're fighters. Doesn't mean they're better fighters. It just means they remember that they come from a family of warriors. Uh, but I think we romanticize it and probably misunderstand it a little bit in the Western world.
No, I appreciate that. Hanchi Legacy, as we're talking about the topic basically right now being the leading force of a martial art outside of Japan. And, with Shorin, but especially with the White Crane, why is it important that we are that force? And why does that become to the point where maybe it's almost being practiced here more than there?
Well, I was really taken aback by when he said Mikio Kaden is like being knighted. And from Richard Kim and those people that I've learned about the Mikio Kaden scrolls is I understood that it was someone being handed the reins of a style, you know, the more obviously very, very classical. I mean, if we want to talk about getting those, is um, how long does it take you to learn everything about your style, right? So, guys, the persons who getting the Meikyo Kaden scrolls would be someone who knows the most about it because nobody will ever know everything about it. And then that also in turn asks the question uh, about spending how much time are you spending doing those? Just like Sensei Master says, it takes many years to be given the secrets of different levels of the katas. So that in turn would ask me, would would demand me that how much time do you need to learn everything about your art? That's a question I'm putting out to you people.
All of it. You need all of it.
All the time.
I remember on your
Yeah,
episode when we asked how much training you should do, you said all of it.
yeah, yeah. So and and to me, in a sense, maybe it's just my own personality. Is that's why I I find I have a hard time even with EI because even though I do EI now for my own, I could never go and teach EI because I know so little about it. So I'm just wondering if got it here somewhere. Is being ample enough? Is that a good martial artist? If you,
In
just you take up a bunch of different martial arts and you only get to be so good because you don't have a lifetime to give to that art. So I'm just is being ample enough in an art good enough to make your cadence scrolls?
I mean, no.
I would say definitely no, because I would say that you have to, like yourself and like Suino Sensei said, that you have to dedicate your life to it, and this is why we're talking about it now. And um and I think, and no doubt you will hopefully agree with this, with when you have a student, you have many students come through the door, but sometimes you can see a special student, and they're normally the ones that pretty much go the full distance. um my father he has a habit of making history. Whenever he does things, he does it full-heartedly, and myself as well. You know, we was only talking about this the other day. There's not a day that goes by that we don't either train in Tenjin, think about Tenjin, think about what it's teaching you, blah blah blah. You know, he was, if we're going off subject a little bit, you know, he was one of the major pushers in the osteopathic world in the UK and in Europe to raise the level up in education. So, and this is why now British osteopaths actually can come over to America and open up as a British osteopath.
Mm.
We're not the same level as American osteopaths because they're medical doctors, but we're getting to the point where now we're producing professors in osteopathy. And this is what I'm trying to get to, is that the fact that my father has always shown that dedication to what he does. So therefore, in osteopathy, he was also the principal of a college that I went to. So it was a full-time thing. He doesn't go into it half-heartedly, and there's many people like that, and they're the ones that then take whatever they're doing forward and maybe into the next level or next realm, if we want to sound spiritual.
First off, I said this in episode 28. If you are out there and you're a martial artist and you're not aware of osteopathy, it's magical. It's not magical, it's real, it's skeletal structure, etc. But in my healing journey from all the nicks and dings and everything, I found it to be the single most specific emanating work. So that's, I don't know Sensei Masters personally, but I know that osteopathy is real and works. And in fact, chiropractic was derived from it and is what I would call a shadow version of it. In any case, I do want to go back to something you brought. Oops, Sensei Masters. You mentioned starting again, and I want to go to you first, Sensei Dauphin, because I'm going to tell a quick story where somebody was grading for their second Dan and they were being asked about their knowledge, and they were giving an answer of like, "Well, I know even less than when I got my first Dan," which is a very clever, cute, zenny answer, and you just went, "Yeah, but come on. You know more. You've done more." And I want to ask you, therefore, Sensei Dauphin, to start this topic of, do you start again? You know, the idea of your black belt becoming white because you frayed it? Or can you ever start again, given that you do know things?
Man, that's a hard question to answer. Um, I think martial arts is cyclical. So, like things that you learn in the beginning, you come back to it again later. Like there's this constant cycle of coming back to it. I always tell my students, you, as Suino Sensei says, first you need to be willing to be horrible at something to be good at it. But then there's this cycle of being horrible at it again and
Mm,
again and again. You learn a new cut, you're horrible at it until you get good at it. You learn a new kata, you're terrible at it until you get good at it. So I guess there is a cycle, Sean, of constantly going back and having a beginner's mindset. And I think Sense Legacy is really right when he says the greatest title you're ever going to have is student, which is that's a learning mindset, right? Like when you're a student, you're in a learning mindset. And yeah, whether it's, I'm not sure that you learn the punch again necessarily once you learn it, but you should go back to that mindset of not being good at something and kind of trying to rediscover it and get good at it again. Um, and I guess the last thing I'll say to put a button on it is, when I joined BJJ 3 years ago, when I would get out of the car, I would just say, "You're a white belt."
mm.
Not a seventh N in karate, not a fourth N in Iaido. You're a white belt. And I would walk into the room and put that in my mind, right?
Yeah.
So I
And what
think,
I'm hearing a bit from what you say there is to empty your cup, which I think is the first story in Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. On that note, I'll go to you, Hanshi Legacy. You know, do you start over? Do you become a white belt?
It depends your position. Like I guess this is the egg and the chicken question. Is the path you walk or take, is it for you to learn for yourself, or is it you learning it to teach other people? Right. And when you ask, do you know more? When you feel that you realize you have to learn more, yes, because you learn to discover by asking questions. And becoming a student and learning a little bit gives you enough knowledge to ask deeper questions. And then when you get your second then you know more and you can ask deeper questions. I'm
Mm,
a 10th Dan. I ask questions all the time. I get answers from beginners who just blurt it out just because out of experience. Maybe, it's like a path in the snow. You're walking a new path, but you're still learning the same thing. So it's just so many different people coming from so many directions that you're gonna learn something from everybody.
well, I really appreciate that. And before we go to Sensei Suino, I want to add around about myself that, having hit 50, I felt some changes in my body around this time. And so I've never taught or been a student as this guy. So that's a bit of what I'm hearing about the path, not only of teacher, but I've never been in this place on the path, teaching or learning. So that alone inherently makes it a new experience. Sensei Suino, you start again, or is that a, you know, hyperbolic concept?
Uh, yes and no. Look, I think all of us have gone through this process where we learn something, we learn some basics, then we start applying them. Maybe a teacher or at a seminar, we learn some other concepts that we follow, and we follow that to its logical conclusion, or sometimes on a real basic level, we just get bored with that rabbit hole. And then you stop and you say to yourself, what am I working on? Well, let me go back to the beginning, right? We do that all the time in big and small ways. So it's just practical. I don't know that we have to, it's not like we're always, making a proclamation or someone's telling us, you got to go back to white belt. I think we kind of do it all the time naturally in our studies. But another thing we can do, and I've mentioned this on the show before, that I've done a couple times in my careers. I've just really tried once in a while to say, let me put all the dogma aside, even what my teacher told me, and really explore this for myself. Okay, I've been told this is the right way to do this. What are the principles that underlie it? Do I agree with that? Let me test it, right? Let me put this judo, uh, you know, tactic to the test against real opponents. Let me really study these Iaido moves and really feel like, am I doing them with balance, with precision, with power? Um, and that's kind of both a figurative, well, it's a figurative emptying of your cup that in some ways is taking you back to white belt. And every time I do that, I come back with, I think, a deeper understanding of the stuff that I worked on, and often making some adjustments. I don't know that they keep me on the
Mm.
direct path that my instructor gave me, but I think philosophically it's on the same path.
Well, I think too of like the idea of getting good by doing something. And then when you get good or feel good, you stop doing the thing that got you there.
Mm.
And I think that's what I hear you saying a little bit. Before we go to you, Sensei Masters, for your thoughts on starting over again and what that means for you, Sensei Dauphin, do you want to read that quote you just sent me? Because I think that really applies, especially to what Hanshi just said.
Yeah, it might have been Hachi who first said it to me. I'm positive it probably is. Um, that a student is a person who's in search of answers, and a master is a person who's in search of better questions and new questions. Um, so
Sweet, sweet. Sensei Masters, where do you want to go with this topic of starting over and what that actually means to you? And are you really starting over, or are you just starting from a new plateau?
I think personally, I think you start just looking at things in a slightly different way and a different depth. So, like Randy just said, it's often quoted that the search of the Gokuri, or the secrets of martial arts, is actually trying to look for them. because as you're looking for all these so-called secrets, you're learning along the way. So again, every morning is a different day and a different experience, and therefore you can, I sound like one of these um, old masters where I should have grasshopper sitting next to me, but you know, every part of a day, whether it's treating a patient, whether you're doing just a basic ski, it will be different to what you done yesterday. You've just said it with reaching 50. You know, the body changes. The body changes every 7 years, so therefore your experience change, your way of doing things change. So I think when it comes down to the whole, you don't go back to white belt, and Suino Sensei just said there where you empty the cup. Instantly, I thought, when you empty the cup, there's still residence of what you emptied in the cup. You can't totally empty that cup, can you? There's always a little drop of, let's use wine as an example.
Good example.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of my wife, to be quite honest. Um, so if you empty that cup of wine, you'll see little droplets of the wine still in that cup. So you can never get rid of the experience that you've had, but you can actually experience new wine. But already in the mind, the old wine is saying, well, yeah, that was okay, but this wine's better. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
That makes a lot of sense. And
Oh,
yeah, when I was first learning how to act at my theater school, there was a bridge, and over it in Toronto on the East End, it just said, "The river I step in is not the river I stand in."
absolutely. And this is also a translation. So at the end of each style, you have this character, the Japanese character of Ru, and that can literally mean, translated, is a stream or river. And the river, basically, you're looking at the same picture, but you're not looking at the same picture. So you're looking at, I'm definitely sure that my technique is a lot different to Izo Matemon's, which is the founder of Tenjin Shinryu. And his technique was a lot different to the founder of Yoshinru. So we have a kata called Shinno Kurai. You only have to look each level within Tenjin Shinryu, it slightly changes. But equally, if you go down the parent styles, then it slightly changes even in those, because one when you in Koru, if you add to a system or change it slightly, you have to change the name. So this is why Tenjin Shinryu, the Shin and Yo, are they're honorific to the fact of that the styles come from Shinno Shinryu and Yoshinru. So that's where the Shin and the Yo come from. So Izo Matemon no doubtedly changed the classical kata. So although the principle may be 500 years old plus, the kata, the kata itself, or the box as I like to call it, will be slightly different, maybe a slight different color. You were saying about BJJ, and it's the same with, in my opinion, with most modern martial arts. What happens is you take the principles of the old martial arts and you repackage it and you make it look sexy for the modern audience. So, the you as you were saying about the samurai, you know, back in the 80s, it was the ninja, right? They was the
Yes.
sexy dude.
Yes, they
And
were.
yeah, absolutely. I wanted to be a ninja. I went up to my father. I said, I want to be a ninja. And after he stopped laughing, he said, "No, I'll teach you karate first." So
I love it. Um, yeah, I remember one Halloween, it was just all ninjas. It was just, I think it was Ninjas and Ghostbusters that year. That was
how
it.
did you know though? They're invisible.
The good ones.
I just felt the throwing stars in the side of my face, and I realized I'd been had. The wave hand. Um, we have a question that came in from Al Panacchia, super fan and also guest and friend of the show, and he wanted to know can Sensei Masters mention something we might not know about how his art influenced Kodokan Judo?
Without being controversial.
Be
Oh,
controversial.
be
You'll get
controversial. No, yeah, no.
gotta get
Oh
the
yeah.
ratings up. Rip it.
If you make Sensei Suino turn his camera off and drop off, we'll know that you're on the right track.
Put the noose around my neck, right, don't you?
Bruce Lee's
Um,
dick.
so okay, so the first thing that I would say is the one thing they say about Kano Sensei is that he dropped the dangerous techniques from Koru and came up with Kodokan Judo. I think that's rubbish. I think that's he dropped a couple of techniques. For example, um, Seiyunagi, the shoulder throw, hip throw, uh, shoulder throw. Um, in Tenjin Shinuru, we have it. I think it's in judo. They call it Yura Seiyunagi. So the arm is actually straight out. So the whole idea is as you take it over, you snap the arm. So that's obviously dangerous. Can't be done in modern day. But my biggest fault is that Kano Sensei dropped the spiritual side of things. So which was a lot of the Kuden. And he he wasn't a Menkyo Kaiden in Tenjin Shinru. So he trained with Fukuda Sensei, who initially, and he was a bone setter, so similar to an osteopath. He passed away, and then he eventually trained with Izo Mazatomo, which was the third line in the Izo family, which is the main line. But the actual scrolls that the Kodokan have of Tenjin are scrolls from Fukuda Sensei. So they were his scrolls, and he gave them to Kano Sensei. So he didn't. It wasn't necessarily an official grading, as far as I know. Anyway, um, what else? What else? Well, I think Sensei can be definitely credited with the way that he came up with the whole belt system and formulated it from an educational into a pedagogy, basically. But yeah, I think that's the major difference is that the Tenjin Shinuru and Kodokan Judo. Kodokan Judo doesn't have the essence of the spiritual and the Kuden teaching that Tenjin has. And my personal fault, because you have a lot of groups around the world that claim to be eighth dans in Tenjin Shinru or Kitoru. And I think that's because the Kodokan sent people out, instructors out, and then they were saying they was doing jiu-jitsu, which at the time the Kodokan judo and jiu-jitsu was sort of a name that was being used simultaneously. But the reality is that it wasn't actually doing the old systems, and I think people just took the names from the books
Mhm.
and said, "Yes, we're doing this." My own opinion.
Sensei Suino, anything controversial there?
Yeah.
uh, I mean, that's the as Sensei Master said, that's sort of the dogma is that Kano Sensei removed the dangerous stuff to make it more of a populist physical education methodology. Um, uh, I think to some degree you could argue that, but at the same time, um, you look at uh, some of the old kata. You look at Koshiki no kata. There are techniques in there that are uh, deadly. They're right. That's a warrior's kata. It's just not done at full sports speed. Um, I mean, I'm not a historian, so I don't know that much about the evolution from the old jujitsu systems to what we call judo now. Um, I'm gonna rely on Sensei Masters because I'm sure he knows way more about this than I do.
Not necessarily. Um, what I would say is, so for example, the Kimi kata. So Kimi kata was originally called uh, um, Sobo Shinken no kata. So instantly when they renamed that to Kimi kata, it lost an essence straight away. Um, there's a lot of the techniques from the Kimi kata came from Tenjin Shinoru. And again, the Kano Sensei it was said that he preserved those katas in honor to the jiu-jitsu systems that he learned. So Kushiki no kata, for example, is the direct kata, as I understand it, from the Kitoru Tenno Maki, so the Heaven Scroll. So again, there would be a lot of high level Kuden teachings with that, rather than just the way that the throws are being made, because Heaven Scroll is, as I say, is well, obviously heaven is it then will say how the founder of Kitoru, who I don't actually know, how he would be enlightened. So in the Tenno Maki of Tenjin Shinoru, it says that his own Mataemon witnessed the willow tree and how he yelled it in the wind, and this is how the softness of jiu-jitsu came about.
We're going to move on to one of the main reasons we have you here, other than how fabulous this is, which is when you're talking about that arm break throw, and you're like, you can't really just do that. I saw your face, Hanchi Legacy, and you literally went, maybe you can. I don't know, just.
Well,
Old school.
It was a beautiful glimmer of your thinking. Um, but one of the best martial artists I trained with down at Machado, his motto was ABC, always be choking. He didn't say always be arm barring. He didn't say always be heel hooking. He said always be choking. And punch, kick, choke, chat. It's in the name of our show. Talk to us about your choking seminar and why that's something significant to focus on in this day and age.
Right. So first of all, the whole terminology, I think, has been massively lost, and it's changed because of I think it's mainly changed because of the UFC, and how commentators say, "Look how he choked," like you've just said, always be choking. The reality is that if you actually choke someone, it normally leads to death because of lack of oxygen, because you're crushing the trachea. So in Japanese, shime or shimiru actually means to constrict. So that then leaves it open to whether you're constricting arteries or airways. One of the other things that's been massively taught wrong for the last 100 and so years is that when you strangle someone unconscious, um, it restricts the blood flow going to your brain. When you restrict blood flows, if you restrict an artery, if there's basically you've got the carotid arteries and then you've got the vertebral arteries going to the brain. If you restrict one, the other well, there's okay, so you've got the common carotids and then they split into internal, external carotids. So let's just say that we've got four in the front, two in the back. They all then meet up in the brain. There's like a spaghetti junction called the circle of Willis. And I'm not going to go too much into the anatomy, otherwise people will fall asleep. But when you occlude an artery, the other arteries will compensate. So they will actually get bigger. Now, the reason why people go unconscious is you've got a neurological side and you've also got a vascular side. So the vascular side is because the blood flow is not going out of the cranial vault. So then that backs up, it tells the neurovascular system, oh, sorry, something's gone wrong there. It's because I'm using hand gestures. The neurovascular system basically says you're going to have a stroke, so you need to pass out. I compare strangulation techniques that were used in jiu-jitsu as the same as using a taser in today's world. So if you have someone in front of you and they're aggressive, you're a police officer or security officer or whatever, and you pull the taser out, the whole idea is to immobilize the person, so you're enabling them to cuff, and then you can apprehend the person. In strangulation, that's exactly the same case. You immobilize the person. I nearly said patient there. Definitely not.
Soon to be patient.
Never been proved. You immobilize the person, and then you bind them using hojo jutsu, which is the use of the rope. If you're doing a choke, so I use today's modern terminology back to when the samurai. So therefore, you couldn't just go around cutting people's heads off because that was illegal. So you have this use of force continuum if you're law enforcement. And as I said, Shinno Shindaru, which is the precursor to Tenjin Shinryu, was taught in Osaka Castle by the head of police of Osaka Castle. So there's a lot of binding techniques and restraining techniques. So it's this level, this big level of use of force, of whether or not you're going to crush the trachea, or whether you're just going to strangle someone unconscious. And of course, if you strangle someone unconscious, if we're going into forensics now, if you strangle someone unconscious, that will then, if you keep it on, that leads them to actually going into a choke. So if you're doing that, for example, you have a resistance, person goes unconscious. If you're still got that intent of putting that on, that will collapse. And that's often what happens in forensics. The hyoid bone is actually broken. So they often say it's due to strangulation.
Well, first off, I love what you said about the brain response being actually what makes someone go unconscious, because you're right, it wouldn't make sense after 5 seconds of a good blood choke, someone can go out. And
Mhm.
that's not enough time for the brain to perceive lack of oxygen.
Mhm.
Talk for a little bit before we go around the horn on choking ideas about the difference between a blood choke, like what we're talking about with these, and an actual trachea choke.
Well, trachea choke would actually lead to death if you're actually putting it on harder. So there was a book. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. He does. We have in Tenjin Shinryu, we have a set of techniques called Ratai Dori, which means it actually means naked grip, and that actually, if you like, was a precursor to the UFC. So we for this particular set of techniques, we'd take our gi jackets off and we'd just be in our trousers. So you had no top on, nothing to grip. So that's where the whole naked choke comes from. If you choke trachea wise, you place the notch of the forearm across the trachea, and if you're looking at it with intent of taking the person out fully, then it's that. Now, I think it was the 1920s, as I say, this book, The Secrets of Jiu-Jitsu, by Captain McLaren, I think, but don't quote me on this. He does a version of the naked choke, and what he does, which is interesting, is he will take it fully down like we do in Tenjin. So we go from stand up down to the knee. And but he also says about a neck break, basically, because of the force and the curve within the vertebrae. And yeah, I think that's
Excuse me.
bless you. I think that's very viable. You would dislocate and put sudden force through. So if you're doing the blood choke, then the arm goes to the side.
Mhm.
If you're going a trachea, then it's in the front, but that's more dangerous.
Yeah. Sensei Dauphin, let's throw it to you. You know, you for 3 years you've been in the choke game. Obviously, there's Bunkai and karate, so you've been doing it for a lot longer. But what's your take on the blood chokes, the trachea chokes, in general? Your take on it as self-defense martial arts. Where do you want to go with this?
I don't know they're real. I can tell you that. Like, I mean, I've seen the clouds come in many times over the last 3 years when you don't want to tap and you want to see how far you can go, and the vision gets smaller and smaller until somebody's shaking you awake again. I've also more recently had the opportunity to watch people like as you're, baseball choke where you're underneath them and you're looking at their face as you see their eyes kind of like closing and their head dropping down. And I don't know, that happens as we were just talking about. That's not like a long process. That happens within like 2, 3 seconds. Like you see the person, like you have them, you slide under, and then. But I didn't know that that's their body telling them you're having a stroke. You better shut things down here. Um, I'm gonna try and give them a stroke faster tomorrow morning when I get there.
What about you, Sensei Suino? Talk to us about chokes, your approach, your vibe, your favorites, your least favorites.
Uh, I have been choking people for a long time in judo and have been choked a long time. Um, uh, I think it's a fabulous subset of art of skills, that we encounter in BJJ and in judo grappling and in self-defense, of course, should the need arise. Um, uh, my favorite is a I guess I'll call it a crucifix choke, where I'm behind somebody and if they're facing away from me, I've got their right arm controlled with my right leg, and I've got their left arm controlled or left wrist controlled with my right wrist, and that's how I bring my other hand inside their gi. This is a gi choke, but doesn't have to be, right? A gi choke, but that takes away their tools, their tools to resist it. Um, what I find really interesting, I mentioned this before we started the show, is all the joyous ways that people come out of chokes. Um, and I don't recommend, this is knowledge gained when I was younger and maybe not as careful as I am today. I don't recommend people experiment with this too much because it can be dangerous. I think that's part of what Sensei Masters is talking about. It can be dangerous, but it's very interesting to note how people come out of being choked out. That some people are very disoriented. Some people are still in the fight that they were in before they got choked out. Some people are very they get a dopamine hit from it. I'm one of those guys that I'm always very smiley after I've been choked. It's I can't really explain why, um, but it's a fascinating game. And I will say this, I've been doing it for a long time. I don't consider myself really good at it. Um, because I met some folks, some judo players in Japan that were extraordinary at it, and they could choke you out so fast with their hands so relaxed in such subtle ways. So I kind of know what I know where I am on
Mm.
on the ladder, and it's two or three rungs up. But I also know that there's, which is why everybody should go to Sensei Masters strangulation seminar that he's going to teach soon because that ladder has got many rungs on it, and it takes a lot of time and work, right, and education and mentorship to get good at that stuff.
I mean, if you're two or three rungs, I'm one or two. But I just love the chokes. I just absolutely, the better I get at holding position and grappling, the more available they become, obviously, because as people are defending one thing, they open up the neck to other stuff, including no gi. Um, Even the smallest detail on a rear naked is just bring the elbows together before you bring it down, and all of a sudden it's just 10 times more powerful. These little things are amazing. The first time I was ever choked out at summer camp, we were like 16 and we used to hyperventilate, and then somebody would choke us. And I remember waking up and this like 12-year-old, this little kid singing Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds over top of me. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. That said, I've never let myself be choked unconscious in class because, as Sensei Panakia just dropped in, IJF does not allow choking in over 60 age competitors now. And don't worry, Sensei. If you want me to, I will. If you just ask, I will do what my instructor asks. But
So
no,
I have something to say on that.
yes.
So I was teaching 10, 11 years ago in to the Swedish military. They was combat instructors, and I was going into this, and I basically said to them that you really shouldn't allow yourself to be strangled out over the age of 28. And one of the guys put his hand up and was like, why is this? I said, because that's when we start deteriorating. The body's finished growing, so therefore we start going the other way. And if if you if you do a strangulation, like I said before, if you pop this across and then I go unconscious and I've still got this intent of popping this across, it acts as a little strike on the arteries, and that then can lead to a TIA, or what's commonly known as a mini stroke. One of the guys the instructors of the military, he came up to me, he said that happened to one of our guys. We was doing an escape and evade, and this guy came up behind one of the guards and strangled him unconscious. He was 34 and suffered a TIA. Now, I love martial arts. I have been strangled unconscious by my father, um, and hit actually, and but these are controlled situations, and controlled situations are better than in the sort of randori scenario, because if the person doesn't admit that they've been done, then that's when it gets dangerous. Like anything, like a simple armbar, simple, he says.
Mhm.
Um, it's funny because even, like work like on in a bottom side control escape, flaring that on a person's trachea it just elicits a reaction. There's no way that that's not going to make someone turn in a way that helps you escape. Hanchi Legacy, you've spent your lifetime chasing perfection in a percussive art. Where do chokes fit in your thinking, if at all? Because I remember you talking about chokes many times during bunkai and escapes and self-defenses.
I'm not. Um, I'll just back out of that because that's not my field. I mean, I can do basic chokes, but I'm not in that field at all.
Right on. Well, you taught me one of the best basics that helped me with jujitsu 28 years later, which is
Yeah,
when you're being choked, turn toward their shoulder, because otherwise you're choking yourself on the thing. And I literally use that as a white belt to get out of a lot of bad situations, only knowing that from you.
yeah. Well, I'm not at this level of conversation.
Appreciate that, Hanchi. So let's talk specifically about your seminar, Sensei Masters, where people can go. Are you doing just a tour of them, one or a number?
So what I decided a little while ago is, basically because of you guys as well, is that I decided to do a webinar on the effects and differentiation between strangulation and choking, and also to introduce a little bit of some dynamics that are not often taught. Um, this webinar will only be for about an hour and a half long, so it's not massive amount, and it will contain the basic anatomy and physiology between the difference between the two, and also the mechanics of why these things are happening. So, like I said earlier on about the whole stroke thing, about the blood pressure going up, but there's more to it as well, and also how um, to make these strangulations, the blood strangulations, a little bit more effective. Um, so, which I kind of learnt once I've gone through all the Tenjin Shinryu kata. You kind of see there's a difference in and the pattern within the kata and why you're doing it. And because of my knowledge within osteopathy, it's suddenly opened the gates of how a simple strangle actually engages different levels of your body. So generally, it's like going back from the back to the beginning. You know, if you want to, I say to people, if you want to hit someone, then come along to me or go to a karate class, develop the punch, and then start hitting things. If you want to then know the depth of why you're hitting someone and why that has an effect on the body, then you have to go to another level. And hopefully this is going to be that next level within strangulation and choking. And you know, I've also putting in some of the concepts of osteopathy into this. So in osteopathy, we actually say that we have four diaphragms. So you have the anatomical one that everyone knows, the muscle that makes you breathe. But you also have the pelvic floor, you have the muscles around here, and then you have what they call the tentorial, which is the direct connection of muscle to brain. It connects to the dura, which is the membrane around the brain. So I'm going to actually introduce the reason why mechanics of a simple strangle and how that affects those different levels. And if you do certain positions, it will actually make that strangulation a little bit more effective.
And if somebody's doing this webinar, should they have a partner with them? Should they be practicing? Is that going to be
No,
something to be part of it?
no,
No. So it's
no, no. This is purely a theoretical
Mhm.
webinar. It's just to enhance people's knowledge a little bit. Um, and, you know, one of the other things you were saying about when you've been strangled unconscious, and I think Randy said that it all slowly comes in, right? Well, the two main differences between choking and strangulation is some people like to get strangled. Okay, there's a certain group of people out there that love it.
That's
No one,
David Carradine.
but no one likes to be choked because it's like drowning. And in Tenjin, in our jiu-jitsu, when we do certain techniques, we hide our heads down because the person's going to be trying to get you off and flowering away, just like you're drowning. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that I'm going to go into, and also the use of force, continuum of how these things happen in are placed in law as well. So um, like you said with Hanshi Legacy, that or he said that he was percussive. It's the same mechanics. It's the same mechanics. So um, hopefully people will learn from it anyway.
Mhm. Um, I want to go to something Sensei Dauphin mentioned at the beginning. Classical, we're all classical men on this. 21st century, you enjoy your firearms. How does one blend those? Does one need to, as you're bringing in something that wasn't kicking around in any real way in the 1500s? Uh, how do you apply a classical mindset? Do you need to? What's your approach to that?
The principles of combat are the same, whether it was caveman, Cain and Abel, whatever, Cain and Abel picked up a rock and killed his brother, it's first written documentation of improvised weaponry. Um, so like I said, the katas actually show you a principle. The I have a couple of webinars that I've done for an undercover narcotics cop. One was the choking and strangulation, and the other one was the mechanics of striking. And again, in Tenjin Shinryu, we're really lucky because 100 years ago, some of the top Shihan were actually um, big in medicine. So a lot in old systems jiu-jitsu, most of them were bone setters, the teachers. As I say, we're lucky in that the fact that actually we had the father of they call him the father of modern physiology, was actually a Tenjin Shinryu um, teacher, and he quotes certain research that is still being quoted today regarding certain percussion techniques, and the effects that it has on the heart and everything. So that's in the striking seminar, but that's another story. Regarding modern application, as I said, cuffing someone or binding them up with rope is pretty much the same. We have to do it slightly different today. Because of legality of putting people on their side, because of breathing and etc. That is also covered a lot in the strangulations, because of the diaphragms. But there is no difference in fighting. So if you try and hit me, you're gonna hit me, whether you're gonna use a basic fist or whether you're gonna use a Nippon Ken, because you're specialist. But you want to get from A to B, and I think, like you said, Sean, that Mikado Sensei said, with the ABC, ABCs exist in all martial arts, so you always have the one sort of go-to principle. In Tenjin, it's block, strike, throw, strangle. That's it. That's what we try to do. Does
Sensei,
that answer?
well, we started off talking about the gun idea, and I actually
Oh, right. Sorry.
you just said, but
So the gun idea, but sorry about that. So the gun
not at
idea,
all. That was awesome.
the whole idea with that is that you would use your hands in ways and means of accessing your firearm if you're either a police or undercover police as well. So um, body mechanics are the same. Body mechanics are body mechanics. Whether you're trying to access your secret hibuki or secret, which means hidden weapon, whether it's a gun or whether it's just a knife or some old school weapon.
Sensei Dolfang, classical man, modern firearms. Does it matter to link them? Do you link them? You're muted.
Sorry, we already said it's sorry, I've been coughing a lot at the last bit of this. But it's the mindset, right? Like period. It's the mindset. I think today there's maybe a lot of cosplay and people think that that's a classical mindset. I think sometimes when you seek perfection in technique, which I think is a really good thing to do, that doesn't always translate over into the perfection of technique doesn't always translate over into a chaotic situation. And I guess what I would give everybody is a scenario, right? So Sokan Bushi Matsumura, the founder of our system, my system, Sensei Legacy system, Sharner, uh, he also carried a sword. He's a bodyguard of a king. And so I want you to think about he loved karate, right? Like he trained karate, he passed this forward. Somebody breaks into Shuri Castle and they go after the king, and he yanks his sword out of his belt and throws it down on the ground and fights him with his karate. Probably not gonna happen, right? Since Legacy told me this like 3 decades ago. Yeah, you attack Matsumura, he's got a sword on. He's not gonna fight you with his karate, he's gonna cut your head off. Right? So and nobody's going to argue with the fact that Matsumura is a classical mindset. Maybe classical mindset means is synonymous with more a combative mindset for me.
I just want to go to Hanshi Legacy next, but I want to throw in, I was thinking along those lines, Sensei, and I said this in one of the early episodes, like classical martial arts doesn't mean historical in a museum. These were men of their times. And so I would almost go so far as to argue that if you're a martial artist today, you have to have some knowledge of firearms, because what's more martial than at least knowing that that exists and could confront you? It's almost an abdication of being a true classical martial artist to not be able to understand that on some level. Hanshi, where do you go with guns? Classical? Do they blend? Do they have to?
Well, I'd have to say that talk about application and practical application are two different animals. You know, if a person is doing this and he has a gun, you don't know if he's reaching for cigarettes or. I think it's don't bring karate to a gunfight. You know, that type of an idea. So you sort of have to know where you are in everyday life. You know, you want to prevent having to fight somebody with a gun. If the gun is out, like a police officer, but not a police officer, and they're reaching for a gun because you're in a fight, then you may have a chance punching him in the neck or knocking him out or something. But in Canada, anyway, most people don't carry weapons, and neither do I. So it may become helpful in an ordinary, everyday type of, fight or confrontation. But uh, guns are modern because they get the job done. So you have to be careful of who you are and what you do.
Thanks, Hachi Sensei Suino.
Well, the only thing I'll add to this is if you watch the movie Shogun or The Last Samurai, you saw, and I don't know how strictly historically accurate that was, but you saw that the samurai that insisted on staying classical, true to their roots, and not using firearms lost the fight badly, right? So it's just worth thinking on the idea of a force spectrum, use of force spectrum. And if you're really a warrior, don't you need to understand as much of that use of force spectrum as possible, whether it's something people did 500 years ago or whether they're doing it today?
If only Commodore Perry was here so we could ask him some questions.
The samurai unfortunately came up and pulled their swords out and started calling out their ancestors' names, and they just shot them. that's the restoration.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I have to say that that one of the reasons why I went down the firearms line was because of the people that I teach. So my general take on if you're going to use a combative system, I don't know whether some of you have seen some of my posts, but if you're going to use a weapon, whether it's anatomical or whether it's a weapon that's been made up out of foreign substances, shall we say, then you have to use that weapon and practice with that weapon. And that means if I'm using my fist, then I hit the makiwara in the case of karate or the bag. I don't wear gloves when I'm hitting the bag. I find that that's not a good practice. And so because I was teaching military personnel and police personnel, then I was showing them weapon retention. I felt that I had to then start learning some firearms and get the feel of how a gun actually feels when you shoot it, you know. And even if you shoot a gun from a distance and then you go in very close proximity of the target, like literally holding the target and then shoot, you get the totally different feel back from that gun because you get the percussion from the target, the from the gas and the fire, you get the smell, whereas if you're from a distance, it's totally different. And it's the same with knife techniques. You should um, be able to cut things properly. When my father's very much an old school teacher, so when I first started karate with him, I wanted a pair of nunchuckers because I was 16 and that's what we did, right? And he's like, okay. And I came out with these plastic things, and he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "No, no, you take these," and they're wooden ones. And then the next minute, I'm hitting tires. Because if you, with a pair of nunchuckers, if you hit something and don't follow it through, it's going to wrap back on your knuckles at least. So you have to have that full commitment. And that's like any technique, right? And I think that's the difference in the practitioner of that in combat, the people some of the people that I know do things that I hope I will never do. I'm not saying that I'm a killer or anything like that, and far from it. I'm a lover and a healer. But you have to be committed and you have to have that intent. And that full intent is what transfers over from the classical systems, in my eyes. Um, and also the mindsets, like Randy said. So we have three different mindsets. We have the beginning mindset, we have the middle mindset, and then we had the end. So Zenshin, Zushin, and Zanshin. Everyone knows Zanshin. But to be able to be switched on and carry that through in a application of whatever,
Thank you.
including treating.
Really appreciate that, Sensei. I could talk for another hour and a half, another 3 hours. Hanchi, you want to chip in on something?
Yeah, I just want to sort of put a cap on it all to ask Randy, without mentioning the officer's name, about a conversation you had about him being a police officer, and you said you must use a lot of your karate. So if you could relay that, that sort of put everything into place, I think.
Yeah, I was at a seminar, and again, I won't mention the person's name. He was, I will say, he was a Maryland State Trooper, and he's had a lot of conflicts with firearms. And I asked him about his karate. He's a high-level karate practitioner, and I said, um, "Have you used your karate in your line of work?" And he said, "No, I do my karate for like health." And he said, "I carry 3 guns on me at all times. If anybody attacks me while I'm on the job, they're gonna die of lead poisoning." That's that was his that was his response. So
Actually, all jokes apart, before antibiotics, it was actually bacteria entering the body via the bullet that killed most people. So there you go.
Um, I want to thank Robert Shlumsky, Justin Shea, Andrei Sadashev, Josh Kitchens, Christiana Landolt, Judy Guliani, Stavros Stavroulias, and Emily Ruth Driscoll for running the behind the scenes of Punch Kick Choke Chat. We're really grateful you've been here with us. And we're going to go around the horn now, starting with Hanchi Legacy. And then the last word's going to go to you to say goodnight, Sensei Masters. Hanchi, what do you want to say about our time tonight?
Or just, it was really informative, especially when you're doing grappling and groundwork and stuff, and even some of the medical ideas that Sensei Masters put out. I enjoyed it. I was a student tonight. Felt really good. Thank you very much for being with us. I hope to see you sometime.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Sensei Suino.
Oh, love this, love this. I always feel like we start getting in these conversations and we talk about a variety of different things. There's many things we could spend a lot more time on, and I guess we probably will going forward in the future. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure I won't be the last one to say this, but let's make sure, Sensei Masters, do we have a date and time for your webinar yet, or is that pending?
So it's pending. It's probably going to be at the end of July. And I'm trying to make it so it would be for you guys, it would be around lunchtime on a Saturday or Sunday. But I will be putting that out and perhaps throw it over to you, and then you can put it on your website or something.
Yeah, we'll bomb it out there and get as many people interested in it as we can.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thanks, Sensei. Sensei Dauphin.
man, what a fun evening, Master Sensei. I really enjoyed it. I like when you said the classical makes the modern thing sexy for the modern person, right? You take the classical thing and you just sexy it up, and that makes it better for the modern person. Um, I didn't know that about, and I don't think a lot of people know that about when we talk about a blood choke and oxygen to the brain, that it's actually your brain saying you're having a stroke. You better shut the system down. That's good information for people to know. And you're the right person to be delivering that information. Um, like the tracheal choke leads to death if you put it on fully. Everybody should think about that, right? That's probably why you tap so fast when somebody puts their forearm across your trachea. And then some like strangulations, but not many people like chokes because it's like drowning. Um, if you like strangulations, please send us in some messages, and we'll send you the information about Master Sense's seminar. So thank you so much for coming on. And also, I said it at the beginning, but please tell your dad we all said hi, and we want to know that he's doing well, and we're all supporting him as well.
Thank you very much. I will do.
Sensei, I get to guide the chat so much. I just want to say what a pleasure. This is the essence of this show, just ripping around. And I'm really learning the pleasure of having return guests, and especially you tonight. Such a joy. There's no one topic I couldn't have done an hour and a half on. So thank you for your thoughts and your time. How do you want to say goodnight to everybody?
Just keep on training. This has been absolutely wonderful. I can't believe it's gone so quickly, other than the windows now showing light. So my my patients are waiting for me. And keep doing what you do, guys. It's really good.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, senseis.
Thank
Thank
you.
Right.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.